I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed on a quiet Thursday afternoon, holding his weathered hand while we talked about nothing particularly important. Just memories, really. Stories from when I was 7 and he'd take me to the lakefront every Sunday morning to feed the ducks. Edmund was propped up against 2 pillows, looking stronger than he had in days. The pneumonia that brought him to St. Catherine's Hospital 5 days ago seemed to be finally loosening its grip. His color was better, his breathing easier. For the first time in what felt like forever, we had time together. Real time. Not rushed phone calls between meetings or hurried visits where I checked my watch every 10 minutes. I'd spent 15 years building my financial consulting firm into an $8 million enterprise, working 80-hour weeks, traveling constantly, convincing myself that success meant security for everyone I loved. But sitting there in room 412, watching my 82-year-old father smile while recounting how I'd cried when one of the ducks bit my finger, I realized how much I'd missed, how much time I'd traded for money that couldn't buy back a single lost afternoon. "You were always so dramatic," he was saying, his voice warm with affection. "You ran all the way back to the car screaming that the duck was a monster." I laughed. It was a monster. That thing was vicious. "It was a mallard, sweetheart. About this big." He held his hands maybe 8 inches apart, and we both started laughing. Real, genuine laughter that felt like medicine better than anything the doctors could prescribe. That's when everything changed. His hand suddenly clamped around my wrist with shocking strength for a man who'd been so weak just hours before. His whole body went rigid. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by something that made my blood run cold. Terror. Pure, absolute terror in eyes that had always been steady and calm, even when Mom died 6 years ago. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Get me out of here, right now." My heart lurched. "Dad, what's wrong? Are you in pain? Should I call the nurse?" "No." The word came out sharp, urgent. His grip on my wrist tightened until it hurt. "We need to leave, immediately." I looked at him, searching his face for signs of confusion or delirium. The doctors had warned me that elderly patients sometimes experienced disorientation, especially with infections. But his eyes were clear, focused, frightened in a way that was completely lucid and conscious. "Dad, I don't understand. What's happening?" He was staring at the door to his room, his breathing suddenly rapid and shallow. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Didn't you see who just walked in?" I turned to look at the doorway. Doctor. Marcus Holloway stood there in his pristine white coat, that professional smile on his handsome face, holding a tablet under his arm. The same doctor who'd been nothing but attentive and compassionate since Dad's admission. The same doctor who'd spent 20 minutes yesterday patiently explaining every aspect of Dad's treatment plan, who'd called me personally each evening with updates, who'd seemed genuinely invested in my father's recovery. "Mrs. Ashford," he said warmly, stepping into the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to check on how our patient is doing this afternoon." I felt Dad's hand trembling against my wrist. His pulse was racing beneath my fingers. "Everything's fine," I heard myself say, forcing a smile while my mind raced to understand what was happening. "We were just talking about old memories." Dr. Holloway approached the bed, his movements smooth and practiced. He was 48, distinguished-looking, with silver hair perfectly combed back, always impeccably dressed under his medical coat. "That's wonderful. Positive memories are excellent for recovery." He glanced at the monitors beside the bed. "I see your vitals are looking good, Edmund. How are you feeling?" Dad didn't answer. He just stared at Holloway with an expression I'd never seen on my father's face before. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't the vague disconnection of dementia. It was recognition mixed with absolute dread. "He's a bit tired," I said quickly, my protective instincts kicking in even though I didn't understand what I was protecting him from. "Maybe we should let him rest." Of course. Holloway made a notation on his tablet, but I noticed his eyes kept flicking to Dad's face, studying him with an intensity that seemed off somehow. Too focused, too calculating. "I'll check back in a few hours. Rest well, Edmund." The moment Holloway left the room, Dad's grip on my wrist loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. He was still breathing hard, his face pale. "Dad." I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. "Talk to me. What's going on? Why are you so scared of Dr. Holloway?" He closed his eyes for a moment, collecting himself. When he opened them again, I saw the same sharp mind that had made him one of Chicago's most respected accountants for 40 years. There was nothing confused about him. "Veronica, I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said quietly. "I know how this is going to sound. I know you're going to think I'm confused or that the medication is affecting my mind. But I am completely lucid right now, and what I'm about to tell you is the truth." My stomach nodded. "Okay, I'm listening. I've been watching him for 3 nights now, when he thinks I'm asleep." Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. "That nurse, Patricia, the one with the blonde hair who works nights, she comes in around 2 or 3 in the morning with medications that aren't on my chart." "What do you mean, not on your chart?" "I mean, I've been conscious enough to know what I'm supposed to be taking. I asked for my medication schedule on Monday. I memorized it. And what she's been giving me in the middle of the night isn't on that list." I felt my professional skepticism warring with my instinct to trust my father. "Maybe they adjusted your treatment. Maybe Dr. Holloway added something and forgot to update you." "No." Dad's voice was firm. "I pretended to be asleep the second night. I watched her. She comes in with a different bag, something from her personal cart. She administers it through my IV, then she pulls out a tablet, not a hospital one, and she writes notes. She times it. She watches my reactions." The words should have sounded paranoid. They should have sounded like the confused rambling of an elderly man on too many medications. But the way he said it, the precise detail, the clarity in his eyes, made something cold settle in my chest. "And last night," he continued, "I heard her talking to Holloway in the hallway. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough. Something about dosages and trial results. Something about how I was responding better than the others." "Others?" The word came out sharper than I intended. That's what she said. Better than the others. Like there were more people, Veronica. Like this is happening to more than just me. I wanted to dismiss it. God, I wanted to believe it was confusion or paranoia or medication side effects. But my father had been a forensic accountant. He'd testified in federal fraud cases. His entire career had been built on seeing patterns others missed, on trusting his instincts when numbers didn't add up. And right now, every instinct I'd inherited from him was screaming that something was wrong. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "Because I needed to be sure, because I know how it sounds, because I didn't want you to think I was losing my mind." He squeezed my hand. But when I saw Holloway walk in just now, when I saw the way he looked at me, I knew. He knows that I know, and we're running out of time. I sat back, my mind racing. This was insane. This was a respected hospital with excellent ratings. Dr. Holloway had stellar credentials, awards on his office walls, recommendations from every medical board. The idea that he was conducting unauthorized experiments on elderly patients was the kind of thing you saw in bad movies, not in real life. But then I remembered something that had seemed odd at the time. Monday morning, when Dad was first admitted, I'd overheard 2 nurses talking in hushed voices near the medication station. One of them had said something about another transfer to 3 East and how it was the 3rd one this month. The other had shushed her quickly when she noticed me approaching. And there was something else. Tuesday evening, when I'd stayed late, I'd gone to get coffee and seen Patricia Voss, the night nurse Dad mentioned, coming out of a storage room that wasn't the regular medication dispensary. She'd looked startled to see me, almost guilty, before pasting on a professional smile and hurrying past. Okay, I said slowly, my analytical mind starting to shift into the same mode I used when examining corporate accounts for irregularities. Let's think about this logically. If what you're saying is true, if there really is something going on, we need evidence. We need documentation. I know. Dad's voice was steadier now, reassured by my belief in him. That's why I've been staying awake at night. That's why I pretended the pneumonia was worse than it was today. I needed them to think I wasn't aware enough to notice anything. Pride mixed with fear in my chest. Even at 82, even sick and vulnerable, my father was still the sharpest person I knew. What time does Patricia usually come? Between 2 and 3, always when the floor is quietest. I checked my watch. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Then we have time to prepare. But Dad, if we're going to do this, if we're going to prove what's happening, we need to be smart. We can't let them know we're suspicious. Which means I need to stop looking terrified every time Holloway walks in the room, Dad said with a weak smile. Exactly. I stood up, my mind already forming a plan. I'm going to call Thomas. Your grandson has skills we're going to need. Dad nodded. Be careful, sweetheart. If I'm right about this, if Holloway really is doing what I think he's doing, then we're dealing with someone who's willing to hurt vulnerable people for whatever he's gaining from this. That makes him dangerous. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. You raised me to be careful, but you also raised me to fight for what's right. If someone is hurting you, if they're hurting other patients, then we're going to stop them. I pulled out my phone and stepped into the hallway, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled up Thomas's number. My son answered on the second ring. Mom, is Grandpa okay? Thomas, I need you to come to the hospital, now. And I need you to bring your laptop and anything you use for legal research and document requests. There was a pause. What's going on? I'll explain when you get here, but Thomas, this is important, and we need to be discreet. Can you do that? I'm leaving the office now. 40 minutes, traffic depending. Thank you. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, looking through the window of room 412 at my father lying in that bed, looking so much older and more fragile than I wanted to admit. For 15 years, I told myself that building financial security was how I protected the people I loved. But money couldn't protect Dad from what was happening in this place. Only vigilance could. Only being present could. And I was about to make up for every minute I'd been absent. While I waited for Thomas to arrive, I found myself thinking about how I'd gotten here. Not just to this hospital, but to this moment where my father had been lying in a bed for 5 days before feeling safe enough to tell me he was being used as some kind of human experiment. The guilt hit me like a physical weight. 12 years ago, my marriage to Richard Ashford fell apart in spectacular fashion. 22 years together, and it ended when I discovered he'd been having an affair with his secretary. The cliché of it almost hurt worse than the betrayal itself. I was 44 years old, suddenly single, with a 20-year-old son who looked at me with pity I couldn't stand, and no career to speak of because I'd spent 2 decades being the perfect corporate wife. Richard was a successful investment broker. We'd lived comfortably in a beautiful house in Evanston, entertained clients, attended charity galas. I'd managed our household, raised Thomas, volunteered on boards. It was a good life, or so I'd thought. The divorce was ugly. Richard fought me on everything, and in the end, I walked away with enough money to survive, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle I'd grown accustomed to. His lawyers had been better than mine. I was too angry to fight strategically, too hurt to think clearly. Dad had been my rock through all of it. He'd just lost Mom to cancer 8 months before my marriage imploded, and I knew he was drowning in his own grief. But he showed up anyway. Every single day, he called to check on me. On weekends, he'd drive from his condo to whatever tiny apartment I could afford that month, and we'd have dinner together. He never said, "I told you so," even though he'd had reservations about Richard from the beginning. One night, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I broke down completely. I was $30,000 in debt, living in a studio apartment, applying for entry-level positions at companies where people half my age would be my supervisors. I felt like I'd wasted my entire adult life. Dad held my hand across a table at a diner and said something I'd never forgotten. "Veronica, you're the smartest person I know. You've been underestimating yourself for 22 years because someone convinced you that your value was in supporting his dreams instead of building your own. That ends now." He'd used $15,000 of his retirement savings to pay for me to get my financial planning certification. I found out years later that he'd mortgaged his condo to do it, something he'd never told me because he knew I would have refused. Thomas told me about it one Christmas when he'd had too much wine, and I'd cried for hours. But that investment changed everything. I discovered I had a gift for financial consulting. I understood money in a way that came naturally, maybe inherited from Dad's forensic accounting brain. I could look at a company's books and see not just what was there, but what was missing, what didn't add up. Within 2 years, I'd built a small but solid client base. Within 5 years, I had my own consulting firm. Within 10 years, I had 15 employees and clients across 3 states. Last year, my company was valued at $8 million. I worked constantly. 80-hour weeks were standard. I took calls at midnight and sent emails at 5 in the morning. I traveled 2 weeks out of every month. I told myself it was worth it, that I was building security so I'd never be vulnerable again, never dependent on someone who could destroy my life with a simple betrayal. But the cost was steep. I missed Thomas's law school graduation because I was in New York closing a deal with a client who represented 30% of my annual revenue. I missed Dad's 80th birthday party because I was in Seattle handling a crisis for a tech startup. I sent expensive gifts and generous checks and told myself that providing financial support was the same as being present. Thomas had been furious after the birthday party. He'd called me from Dad's condo, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "Mom, there were 40 people here. Friends from his accounting days, neighbors, people from his church, everyone except the one person he kept looking for at the door." I explained to him that this deal was important, I'd said defensively. He understood. "No, Mom, he said he understood. That's different. He's never going to tell you he's hurt or disappointed because that's not who he is. But I see his face every time your name comes up and you're not actually there. I see how he checks his phone, hoping you'll call. And I'm getting really tired of making excuses for you." I'd hung up angry, convinced Thomas didn't understand the pressure I was under, the responsibilities I carried. But his words haunted me for weeks afterward. My relationship with my son had been complicated since the divorce. He'd been 12 when he walked in on Richard and his secretary in our home office. He'd been the one who told me, who'd watched me fall apart, who'd essentially lost both parents that year because I was too destroyed to function properly and Richard was too guilty to face him. Thomas had spent his teenage years mostly at Dad's place. Dad taught him to cook, helped him with homework, attended every basketball game, every debate tournament. When it came time for college, Thomas chose Northwestern specifically because it was close to his grandfather. He'd say it was because of the excellent law program, but we both knew the truth. I told myself I was grateful that Dad could be there for Thomas when I couldn't. But underneath, it hurt to know that my son had chosen his grandfather over me, that the bond I should have built with my child had been transferred to my father because I'd been too broken and then later too busy to claim it back. The elevator dinged, pulling me out of my thoughts. Thomas stepped out, laptop bag over his shoulder, still in his suit from work. At 32, he looked so much like my father, it sometimes took my breath away. The same serious eyes, the same thoughtful expression, the same way of moving with quiet purpose. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with concern. "What's going on? You sounded scared on the phone." I realized I hadn't sounded scared in years. I'd built an entire persona around being unshakable, invulnerable. The fact that Thomas had heard fear in my voice said everything about how serious this was. "Let's talk in the family waiting room," I said quietly. not where anyone can overhear. We walked down the corridor to a small room with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. I closed the door and turned to face my son, trying to figure out how to say this without sounding insane. Your grandfather thinks Dr. Holloway is conducting unauthorized medical experiments on him. Thomas blinked. What? I told him everything Dad had told me. The nighttime medications, the nurse with the personal tablet, the overheard conversation about trial results and dosages. I watched Thomas's expression shift from skepticism to concern as I laid out the details. Has Grandpa been confused at all? He asked carefully. Any signs of disorientation or hallucinations? That's what I thought initially, I admitted. But Thomas, I've spent hours with him over the past 5 days. His mind is completely clear. He's tracking conversations, remembering details, making logical connections. This isn't dementia or medication side effects. He's lucid and terrified. Thomas pulled out his laptop and opened it. Okay, let's approach this systematically. First thing we need is Grandpa's complete medical records. Every medication prescribed, every treatment administered, every note in his chart. Can you get those? I can request them. As his grandson and with his consent, I have legal standing, but it'll take a few days through official channels. He looked up at me. Unless you want me to try something faster and less official. Like what? I have a friend who works in medical records. She owes me a favor. If I explain that we're concerned about a discrepancy in his care, she might be willing to pull his file quietly. I should have said no. I should have insisted we do everything by the book. But I kept seeing Dad's face, the terror in his eyes when Holloway walked in. Do it, I said, whatever it takes. Thomas nodded and started typing. I'm also going to search for any complaints or investigations involving Dr. Holloway or St. Catherine's. Any malpractice suits, licensing board reviews, patient advocacy reports. You think you'll find something? If Grandpa's right, if this is really happening, then either Holloway's been incredibly careful, or there have been warning signs people ignored. Either way, there should be some kind of trail. I watched my son work, his fingers flying over the keyboard, his face set in concentration. This was the Thomas I rarely got to see. Not the polite, distant young man who called me every other Sunday out of obligation, but the passionate advocate who'd chosen law because he genuinely wanted to help people. I'm sorry, I said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. For what? For not being there. For all those years when you needed a mother, and I was too busy building an empire because I was terrified of ever being vulnerable again. For letting Dad be the parent I should have been. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You want to have this conversation now, while Grandpa's potentially in danger? No. But I need you to know that I see it. I see what I sacrificed and what it cost. And I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere this time. Whatever this is, however dangerous it gets, I'm staying right here. Something shifted in Thomas's expression. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Okay, he said quietly. Then let's protect him. Together. Thomas's friend came through within 3 hours. By 8 o'clock that evening, we were sitting in my hotel room 2 blocks from the hospital, going through Dad's medical file on Thomas's laptop. What we found made my stomach turn. Look at this, Thomas said, pointing at the screen. These are the medications officially prescribed by Dr. Holloway. Standard pneumonia treatment, antibiotics, breathing treatments, anti-inflammatories, nothing unusual. But look at these notes here. He scrolled down to a section of the digital record. These are nursing logs. Every time a nurse administers medication, they're supposed to log it with a timestamp and their initials. Patricia Voss has been logging medications at 2:15, 2:30, and 3:45 a.m. for the past 3 nights. But the medications she's logging don't match anything on the prescription list. I leaned closer. What is she logging? That's the problem. She's using code numbers instead of drug names. See? Administered compound RT-47, 20 mg via IV, patient stable, no adverse reactions observed. Then an hour later, follow-up observation RT-47, vital signs within normal parameters, cognitive response noted and recorded. Cognitive response? The words made my skin crawl. They're testing his mental state after giving him something. Thomas nodded grimly. It gets worse. I pulled the records for 7 other patients in the same wing who died in the past 6 months. All of them were under Holloway's primary care. All of them have similar late-night nursing logs from Patricia Voss using those same compound codes. Oh my God! 3 of them were listed as dying from complications related to pre-existing conditions. 2 from unexpected cardiac events, 1 from sudden respiratory failure, and 1 from stroke. Thomas looked at me. Mom, these people ranged from 68 to 85 years old. All of them were in the hospital for relatively minor issues. Pneumonia, like Grandpa, a broken hip, routine gallbladder surgery. None of them should have died. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and sharp. He's killing them. He's using vulnerable elderly patients as test subjects for God knows what. And when things go wrong, he just writes it off as natural causes. That's what it looks like. But we need more than suspicion. We need concrete proof. Thomas pulled up another window on his screen. I also searched for any complaints or investigations into Holloway. There's nothing official, but I found something interesting on a medical professional forum. He turned the laptop so I could see better. It was a discussion thread from 8 months ago, initiated by someone with the username Concerned Colleague IL. The post read, "Has anyone else noticed unusual patient outcomes in geriatric care at St. Catherine's, Chicago? I've observed several unexpected deaths in the past year, all elderly patients, all under the same attending physician. When I raised concerns with administration, I was told the death rates were within normal statistical ranges for that age group and dismissed. But my instinct says something is wrong. How do I pursue this without risking my career?" There were a dozen responses, some dismissive, some supportive, but one caught my attention. Be very careful. If you're talking about who I think you're talking about, he has powerful friends and deep pockets. I tried to raise similar concerns 2 years ago at another hospital and ended up without a job or references. Sometimes the system protects the wrong people. Do you think this is about Holloway? I asked. I think it's a pretty big coincidence if it's not. Thomas made a note on his phone. I'm going to try to track down this user, see if they'll talk to us off the record. What about the hospital administration? Can we go to them? With what? A hunch? Coded medication logs that could theoretically be legitimate research approved by some ethics board we don't know about? Mom, if Holloway has been doing this for years and getting away with it, it means either the administration doesn't know or they don't care. Going to them could tip him off before we have enough evidence to actually stop him. He was right. I hated it, but he was right. So what do we do? Thomas checked his watch. It's 8:30 now. You said Patricia usually comes to Grandpa's room between 2 and 3 a.m.? That's what Dad said. Then we have about 5.5 hours to set up surveillance. I'm going to stay with Grandpa tonight. You're going to hide in the supply closet next to his room with your phone recording everything. When Patricia comes in, we document it. Video evidence of her administering unauthorized medications. Won't that put Dad at risk? If she's giving him something dangerous, we're not going to let her finish. The moment she connects that IV, I'm going to interrupt. I'll say I heard Grandpa call out, that I was in the bathroom, whatever excuse makes sense. The point is to catch her in the act, but stop her before any medication actually enters his system. I nodded slowly. It was risky, but it was better than doing nothing. And if she doesn't come tonight? Then we try again tomorrow. And the next night, however long it takes. Thomas closed his laptop. But Mom, we need to prepare for the possibility that this goes bigger than just catching one nurse. If Holloway is running clinical trials without proper authorization, he's not doing it alone. There's money involved, pharmaceutical companies maybe, investors, people with resources who won't want this exposed. Are you saying this could be dangerous? I'm saying we need to be smart. We document everything, we keep copies in multiple locations, and we make sure people know what we're investigating. Safety, invisibility. We spent the next hour preparing. Thomas wrote up a detailed summary of everything we'd found and emailed it to 3 people: a law professor he trusted, a journalist friend who covered medical ethics, and his own supervising partner at the law firm. He included a note saying, "If anything happens to me, my mother, or my grandfather, this is why." I did the same, sending the information to my business partner and my accountant, people who would know something was wrong if I suddenly went silent. By 10 o'clock, we were back at the hospital. Visiting hours were technically over, but I'd learned that rules were flexible when you looked confident and professional. We walked straight to Dad's room like we belonged there. He was awake, reading a book. When he saw both of us, his expression shifted to alert concern. "What did you find?" he asked immediately. Thomas pulled up a chair and explained everything. I watched Dad's face as he listened, seeing his jaw tighten with anger when Thomas described the 7 dead patients. "I knew it," Dad said quietly when Thomas finished. "I knew it wasn't just me, but hearing there are others, that people have died." He closed his eyes briefly. "What's the plan?" We explained the surveillance strategy. Dad listened carefully, then nodded. "Good. I've been pretending to be more tired and confused than I am whenever Patricia or Holloway come in. I'll keep that up. The less they think I'm aware, the safer we are." "Dad, are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "We could try to get you transferred to another hospital right now, get you somewhere safe. And let him keep doing this to other people?" "No." His voice was firm. "I'm 82 years old, Veronica. I've had a good life. If there's a risk involved in stopping someone who's murdering vulnerable patients, then that's a risk worth taking." Pride swelled in my chest, mixed with fear. "You're the bravest person I know." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of watching people like Holloway get away with things because everyone's too scared to stand up." He reached for my hand. "Your mother used to say that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." I didn't fully understand what she meant until right now. Thomas set up his laptop at the small table in the corner, making it look like he was just working while keeping Grandpa company. I kissed Dad's cheek and left the room, then made my way to the supply closet next door. It was cramped and smelled like disinfectant. I wedged myself between shelves of linens and supplies, leaving the door cracked just enough to see Dad's room across the hallway. My phone was fully charged, volume off, camera ready. The hours crawled by. I watched nurses make their rounds at 11, then midnight. Each time, I held my breath, wondering if it was Patricia. But each time, it was different nurses, legitimate nurses doing legitimate checks. At 1:15, I saw Dr. Holloway walk past. He paused at Dad's door, looking in through the window, then continued down the hall. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure someone would hear it. At 2:23 a.m., Patricia Voss appeared. She moved quietly, pushing a small cart that was different from the standard medication carts I'd seen other nurses use. This one was smaller, more personal. She glanced around the hallway before entering Dad's room. I started recording. Through the doorway, I could see her approach Dad's bed. He appeared to be sleeping, his breathing slow and even. Patricia checked the hallway one more time, then pulled something from her cart. An IV bag, unmarked. She was reaching for Dad's IV line when Thomas suddenly stood up from the corner. "What are you giving him?" he asked, his voice loud enough to startle her. Patricia jumped, nearly dropping the bag. "Oh, I didn't realize anyone was here. I'm just administering his scheduled medication." "At 2:30 in the morning?" Thomas moved closer, positioning himself between her and Dad's bed. "What medication specifically?" "It's on his chart." But her voice wavered. "Standard treatment protocol." "Really? Because I've been reviewing his chart, and I don't see any medication scheduled for this hour." Thomas held up his phone, and I realized he was recording too. "So I'll ask again. What's in that bag?" Patricia's face drained of color. "I need to speak with Dr. Holloway." "I think that's an excellent idea. Let's call him right now." Thomas pulled out his phone. Better yet, let's call hospital security and have them present when we discuss unauthorized medications being administered to patients. You don't understand? Then help me understand. Explain to me why you're sneaking into my grandfather's room in the middle of the night with unmarked medications. Explain the coded entries in his medical records. Explain why 7 patients under Dr. Holloway's care have died in the past 6 months after receiving similar late-night treatments from you. Patricia started backing toward the door. I can't talk about this. Can't or won't. Thomas blocked her path. How many people have you hurt, Patricia? How many elderly patients have you used as guinea pigs? I didn't have a choice. The words burst out of her, desperate and anguished. You don't understand. He has evidence of a mistake I made 3 years ago. A patient died because I miscalculated a dosage. He covered it up, said it was a natural death, protected me from losing my license and going to prison, but the price was helping him with his research. Research? Thomas's voice was hard. Is that what you call it when you experiment on vulnerable people without their consent? Tears were streaming down Patricia's face now. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But I have a mother with Alzheimer's in a care facility that costs $6,000 a month. I'm all she has. If I lose my license, if I go to prison, she has no one. I felt a flicker of sympathy, quickly overwhelmed by anger. Everyone had reasons. Everyone had justifications. But at the end of the day, Patricia had made a choice. She'd chosen to protect herself at the expense of people like my father. You have a choice right now, Thomas said quietly. You can keep protecting Holloway and hope this all goes away. Or you can help us stop him before anyone else gets hurt. But if you choose wrong, Patricia, I promise you that I will make sure the full weight of the legal system comes down on you, and your mother will end up alone anyway because you'll be in prison for murder. Patricia was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. He'll destroy me. He has connections everywhere. The hospital administration, pharmaceutical companies, lawyers. I'm nobody. Who's going to believe me over him? We will, I said, stepping out of the supply closet and into the hallway. And we have evidence, medical records showing discrepancies, video of you attempting to administer unauthorized medication, documentation of suspicious deaths. You're not the only villain here, Patricia, but you could be the one who helps make it right. She looked at me with desperate, haunted eyes. What do you want me to do? Tell us everything, Thomas said. What he's testing, who's funding it, how long it's been going on. Give us enough to take him down, and I'll do everything I can to get you a deal. Cooperation in exchange for leniency. Your testimony could save lives. Patricia sank into the chair by Dad's bed, still clutching that unmarked IV bag. It started 2 years ago. Holloway said he had developed a new compound that could reverse cognitive decline in elderly patients. He said it could cure Alzheimer's, dementia, age-related memory loss. He had funding from a private pharmaceutical investor, but he couldn't get FDA approval for human trials because the animal studies showed too many dangerous side effects. So, he decided to test it without approval, I said. He said the potential benefits outweighed the risks, that if it worked, it would save millions of people from losing their minds to age. He started with patients who were already seriously ill, people who probably wouldn't survive anyway. But when the compound actually showed some positive results in a few subjects, he got more aggressive, started testing on people with better prognoses. Like my father, I said coldly. Patricia nodded miserably. Your father was supposed to be a perfect candidate. Clear-minded, good baseline cognition, relatively healthy despite the pneumonia. If the compound showed improvement in someone like him, it would prove the efficacy. And the 7 who died? Adverse reactions. Some had cardiac events triggered by the compound, some had strokes. One developed sudden organ failure. Dr. Holloway falsified the death certificates, listed them as natural causes or complications from their primary conditions. He's a respected physician. No one questioned him. Dad had been silent through all of this, listening. Now he spoke. his voice steady despite everything he was hearing. "How much were you paid?" Patricia flinched. $5,000 per patient I helped him monitor, plus his continued protection from the investigation into the death I caused 3 years ago. "Blood money," Dad said quietly. "I know." Patricia's voice broke. "I know what I am. I know what I've done. I didn't know how to stop." Thomas was typing on his phone. "You're going to write all of this down. Names, dates, every patient you remember. Every detail about the compound, who's funding it, where it comes from. You're going to help us build an airtight case. And then what happens to me? That depends on the prosecutor and what kind of deal I can negotiate. But Patricia, if you do this, if you help us stop him, there's a chance for some kind of redemption. It won't bring those people back, but it might save the ones he hasn't gotten to yet." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Okay, I'll help you. I'll tell you everything." Patricia spent the next hour writing out everything she knew. Names, dates, patient identification numbers. The pharmaceutical investor was a company called Genesis Biotech, based in Delaware but operating internationally. The compound was called RT-47, short for Regenerative Therapy Compound 47. Holloway had been testing it for 26 months. 19 patients total. 7 confirmed deaths. 3 with severe adverse reactions who survived but with permanent damage. 9 still alive, including Dad, most of them showing mild cognitive improvements, but at what cost, Patricia couldn't say. Thomas was photographing every page of her statement when Dad suddenly grabbed my arm. "Someone's coming," he whispered urgently. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Fast, purposeful footsteps. Patricia went rigid with fear. "He knows," she breathed. "Oh God, he knows." Dr. Holloway appeared in the doorway. His professional composure was gone. His face was cold, his eyes calculating and dangerous in a way I'd never seen before. He took in the scene in an instant. Patricia's tear-stained face, Thomas with his phone, me standing protectively by Dad's bed. "Patricia," he said quietly, "what have you done?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I can't—" "You stupid woman." His voice was venomous. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? 20 years of research. Breakthroughs that could have revolutionized geriatric medicine. Millions of dollars in investment. All of it ruined because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." "You were killing people," I said, stepping forward. "You were using vulnerable patients as test subjects without consent, falsifying death certificates, committing murder. That's not medicine. That's sociopathic." Holloway's eyes fixed on me with chilling intensity. "You think you understand, but you don't. Those people were dying anyway. Old, sick, their best years behind them. I gave their deaths meaning. I used their final months to advance science that could save millions." "You don't get to make that choice," Thomas said. "You don't get to decide whose life has value and whose death is acceptable collateral damage." "Don't I?" Holloway smiled, and it was terrifying. "I'm the one with the medical degree. I'm the one who spent decades studying how to heal people. What are you? A lawyer who shuffles papers and a businesswoman who counts money. You're nothing. You understand nothing about the complexity of medical progress." "We understand right from wrong," Dad said from his bed, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in days. "We understand that you took an oath to do no harm, and you've perverted that into justification for murder." Holloway took a step into the room. "You're not going to report this. None of you are." "It's already done," Thomas said. "I've sent everything to federal prosecutors, medical ethics boards, and journalists. Even if something happens to us right now, the information is out there. You're finished." For a moment, I saw genuine fear cross Holloway's face, but it transformed quickly into something worse. Desperate calculation. "You don't know what you've started," he said quietly. "Genesis Biotech has resources you can't imagine. lawyers who will bury you in litigation for years, investigators who will dig into every aspect of your lives looking for leverage. They've spent $4 million funding this research. Do you think they'll just walk away? Let them come, I said. I've spent 12 years building a company from nothing. I've fought through divorce courts and corporate battles. You think I'm afraid of pharmaceutical lawyers? You should be. Holloway pulled out his phone. One call, and I can have hospital security here claiming you've assaulted a nurse and threatened a physician. One call, and your father gets transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation because he's clearly experiencing paranoid delusions. One call, and this entire situation gets reframed as a tragic case of family members unable to cope with a loved one's mental decline. Make the call, Thomas said calmly. Do it right now. Because the moment you do, you confirm everything we're accusing you of. You make yourself look exactly like the guilty party trying to silence witnesses. Go ahead, doctor. Make that call. Holloway's hand tightened on his phone. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then a new voice spoke from the hallway. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus. We all turned. A woman stood in the doorway, probably in her early 40s, wearing a white coat with a hospital ID badge that read, Dr. Lisa Chen, Gastroenterology. Lisa, Holloway's voice was tight, this doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. It concerns every physician in this hospital who actually honors their oath. Dr. Chen stepped into the room, and I saw she was holding her phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every word about falsified death certificates, unauthorized experiments, threats against witnesses, it's all documented. You're making a huge mistake, Holloway said. No, Marcus. You made the mistake when you convinced yourself that your brilliance gave you the right to play God. Dr. Chen looked at us. I've suspected something was wrong for months. Unusual death rates in geriatric care, patients declining rapidly under his treatment, discrepancies in medication records. But I couldn't prove anything until tonight. I was walking past and heard raised voices. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner. You couldn't have known, Dad said gently. I should have tried harder. Doctor, Chen turned back to Holloway. Hospital administration has already been notified. Security is on their way. I suggest you don't make this worse by trying to leave. Holloway stood frozen for a moment. Then, in a movement that shocked us all, he lunged for Patricia. You destroyed everything, he screamed, grabbing her by the arms. Everything I built. Thomas moved fast, pulling Holloway away from Patricia. There was a brief struggle before hospital security burst into the room, followed by 2 Chicago police officers. Within minutes, Holloway was in handcuffs. Patricia was being escorted out separately. Dr. Chen was giving her statement to the police, and I was holding Dad's hand, both of us shaking with adrenaline and relief. It's over, Dad said quietly. We did it. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. This was just the beginning of a much longer fight. There would be investigations, trials, testimony. There would be attempts by Genesis Biotech to contain the damage. There would be legal battles and media attention and complications we couldn't even imagine yet. But for now, in this moment, my father was safe. And the man who'd tried to hurt him was being taken away in handcuffs. That was enough. The next 72 hours were a blur of interviews, statements, and legal proceedings. Federal agents from the FDA arrived to investigate the unauthorized clinical trials. The Illinois State Medical Board opened an emergency review of Holloway's license. Thomas barely left the federal prosecutor's office, working with them to build an airtight case. And I stayed by Dad's side as he was transferred to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, somewhere safe, somewhere Holloway's reach couldn't extend. But on the 4th day after Holloway's arrest, everything got worse. I was in Dad's new hospital room when Thomas arrived looking grim. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Genesis Biotech just filed a lawsuit, not against Holloway, against us. What? I stood up. On what grounds? defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and theft of proprietary information. They're claiming that we stole confidential research data and are spreading false allegations to damage their reputation and business interests. They're seeking $50 million in damages. I felt the blood drain from my face. $50 million? It's a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're not expecting to win. They're trying to bury us in legal costs and intimidate us into silence. Thomas ran his hand through his hair. But Mom, it's working. The federal prosecutor just called me. Genesis has lawyers arguing that Patricia's confession was obtained under duress, that Dr. Chen's recording was made without proper consent, that the evidence we gathered is tainted. They're trying to get everything thrown out before the case even goes to trial. Can they do that? They can try, and they have the resources to drag this out for years. The prosecutor is committed, but she's being realistic about what we're facing. Dad had been listening quietly from his bed. So we fight. Dad, you don't understand. A lawsuit of this magnitude could destroy us financially. Even if we win, the legal fees alone could cost hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Then we sell my condo, Dad said simply. We use my retirement savings. We do whatever it takes. No. The word came out fierce. Dad, you are not sacrificing everything you've worked for because some pharmaceutical company wants to protect a murderer. Then what do you suggest? Thomas asked, his frustration evident. Because Genesis has already started a media campaign. They're painting Holloway as a brilliant researcher victimized by a family unable to cope with an elderly patient's paranoid delusions. They're saying we fabricated evidence to support a baseless conspiracy theory. Major news outlets are running their version of events. I pulled out my phone and started searching. He was right. The headlines were devastating. Respected physician arrested in case based on allegedly fabricated evidence. Family of elderly patient accused of elaborate hoax against hospital. Questions raised about validity of claims against Dr. Marcus Holloway. The articles were carefully written to avoid direct accusations, but the implication was clear. We were the villains in this story. We were the ones who destroyed an innocent man's career. They're controlling the narrative, I said, anger building in my chest. They're using their money and connections to rewrite what happened. Welcome to how the powerful protect themselves, Thomas said bitterly. Truth doesn't matter when you can afford better PR. I thought about the 7 people who died, the families who'd believed their loved ones had simply succumbed to age and illness, the patients who'd been used as guinea pigs without consent, all of it about to be buried under legal maneuvering and media manipulation. No, I said firmly. No, we're not letting this happen. Mom, I don't see how we fight this. We're outgunned in every way that matters. Then we change the battlefield. I was already forming a plan. Genesis wants to control the narrative? Fine. Let's give the public a narrative they can't ignore. We go public with everything. The medical records, Patricia's confession, the list of patients who died. We make it impossible for them to bury this story. That could expose us to even more legal liability, Thomas warned. Or it could create enough public pressure that Genesis has to back down. People are terrified of medical malpractice. They're terrified of hospitals and doctors they can't trust. If we can show them what really happened, if we can make them see their own parents or grandparents in Dad's place, they'll care more than any lawsuit. Thomas looked at Dad. What do you think? I think your mother is right. We can't fight them on their terms, but we can fight them in the court of public opinion, and that's a court where money matters less than truth. Over the next week, we executed a plan that would either save us or destroy us completely. Thomas contacted every journalist he knew who covered medical ethics and healthcare. He provided them with documentation, carefully redacted to protect patient privacy, but detailed enough to show the pattern of abuse. He gave interviews to anyone who would listen. I used every business connection I had. I called clients, colleagues, friends in media and finance. I explained what had happened to my father and asked them to share our story. Some declined, afraid of legal retaliation. But enough agreed that the story started spreading beyond traditional news outlets. Dr. Lisa Chen, bless her, put her own career on the line by speaking publicly about what she'd witnessed. She gave a press conference outside St. Catherine's Hospital, her voice steady as she described the suspicious deaths and her regret at not acting sooner. And Dad, despite being 82 and still recovering from pneumonia, agreed to a televised interview with a major news network. I sat beside him in the studio as the interviewer asked him to describe what happened. I was lying in that hospital bed, vulnerable and sick, trusting that the people taking care of me had my best interests at heart, Dad said, his voice clear and strong. And instead, I was being used as a test subject for an experimental drug that had already killed 7 other patients. When I realized what was happening, I was terrified. Not just for myself, but for everyone else like me. Elderly people who go to hospitals expecting care and instead become victims. The interviewer leaned forward. Mr. Ashford, Genesis Biotech claims that these allegations are false, that you were confused, and that your family is pursuing a vendetta against Dr. Holloway. What do you say to that? I say that's exactly what I expected them to say. It's easier to dismiss an old man as confused than to admit they funded human experimentation without proper oversight or ethical approval. But I'm not confused. I'm clear-minded, I'm angry, and I'm not going to let them silence me by claiming I'm too old to know what happened to me. The interview went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 3 million times. The comment section was flooded with people sharing their own stories of elderly relatives who died unexpectedly in hospitals, who'd deteriorated rapidly under certain doctors' care, who'd raised concerns that were dismissed. The public outrage was immediate and fierce. Genesis Biotech's stock dropped 17% in 2 days. Other hospitals started reviewing their own patient death rates in geriatric care. Medical boards across the country announced investigations into similar cases. And then Patricia Voss did something unexpected. She contacted Thomas and said she wanted to give a full public confession. No deals, no protections. She wanted to face what she'd done. We arranged another press conference. Patricia stood at the podium, looking exhausted and haunted, and told the truth. My name is Patricia Voss, and I helped Dr. Marcus Holloway conduct illegal medical experiments on 19 elderly patients over the course of 2 years. 7 of those patients died as a direct result of the experimental compound we administered. I knew it was wrong. I knew people were being hurt, but I was being blackmailed, and I was being paid, and I convinced myself that I didn't have a choice. I was wrong. I did have a choice, and I made the wrong one every single time. She detailed everything: the compound, the funding, the falsified death certificates, the late-night administrations of RT-47. She named names, provided dates, held nothing back. I can't undo what I did, she said, tears streaming down her face. I can't bring back the people who died, but I can make sure that everyone knows the truth. I can make sure that Dr. Holloway and Genesis Biotech can't pretend this never happened. And I can beg the families of the people I helped hurt to somehow, someday, find it in their hearts to forgive me, even though I don't deserve it. The press conference made international news. The families of Holloway's victims started coming forward, demanding investigations into their loved ones' deaths. 3 more nurses at St. Catherine's admitted they'd had suspicions but had been afraid to speak up. Genesis Biotech's headquarters was raided by federal agents. Documents were seized. Executives were subpoenaed. And 5 days after Patricia's confession, Genesis Biotech released a statement. They were dropping the lawsuit against us. They were cooperating fully with federal investigators. They were establishing a victims' compensation fund. And they were permanently shutting down all research related to RT-47. Thomas showed me the statement on his phone. We were sitting in Dad's hospital room, the 3 of us, when he read it aloud. We got them, Thomas said quietly. We actually got them. Dad reached for my hand. No, sweetheart. You got them. You refused to let them make this disappear. You fought when it would have been easier to stay silent. We all fought, I said, squeezing his hand. But Dad, you were the one brave enough to see what was happening and refused to let fear silence you. You saved lives. Not just your own, but everyone who would have been Holloway's next victims. What happens now? Dad asked. Now there's a criminal trial, Thomas said. Holloway is facing federal charges for conducting unauthorized human experimentation, fraud, falsifying medical records, and 7 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Patricia will testify against him as part of her plea deal. Genesis executives are facing charges for funding illegal research and covering up deaths. It's going to be a massive case. Will we have to testify? I asked. Almost certainly. But Mom, we're not alone anymore. There are dozens of families, multiple witnesses, federal prosecutors with unlimited resources. This is bigger than us now. I thought about how close we'd come to losing. How easily this could have been buried if Dad hadn't been brave enough to speak up. If Thomas hadn't known how to gather evidence. If Dr. Chen hadn't recorded that conversation. If Patricia hadn't finally chosen to do the right thing. How many other hospitals had situations like this that never got exposed? How many vulnerable people were being hurt because everyone was too afraid to stand up to powerful institutions? I want to do something, I said suddenly. With my company, with my resources, I want to create a foundation that investigates suspected medical abuse of elderly patients. I want to help other families who don't have the knowledge or resources to fight back against hospitals and pharmaceutical companies. Thomas smiled. That's a really good idea, Mom. Your mother has always had good ideas, Dad said warmly. She just needed to remember that some things are more important than building empires. He was right. I'd spent 12 years focused on financial success, on never being vulnerable again. But sitting in that hospital room with my father and my son, having just fought and won against forces that should have crushed us, I realized something important. True strength wasn't about being invulnerable. It was about choosing to fight for what mattered, even when you were scared, even when you might lose everything. And nothing mattered more than the people you loved. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of my company headquarters, looking out at the 23 people gathered around the table. Lawyers, medical ethicists, patient advocates, family members of Holloway's victims. We were officially launching the Ashford Foundation for Patient Safety and Medical Accountability. Thank you all for being here, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. 6 months ago, my father nearly became another victim of medical abuse that should never have happened. Today, because of his courage and the courage of people like Patricia Voss and Dr. Lisa Chen, we're making sure that what happened to him doesn't happen to others. The foundation had 3 primary goals. First, to provide legal and investigative resources to families who suspected medical abuse of elderly patients. Second, to advocate for stronger oversight of clinical trials and pharmaceutical research. Third, to train healthcare workers to recognize and report suspicious patterns in patient care. We'd already received 47 requests for assistance from families across the country. Thomas had left his corporate law firm to run the foundation's legal division. Dr. Chen had joined our medical advisory board, and Patricia Voss, after serving 8 months of her 2-year sentence, had agreed to work with us upon her release, using her insider knowledge to help identify red flags in hospital systems. After the meeting ended, Thomas walked with me to the parking garage. "You know what Mom told me yesterday?" he said. "Grandpa told her he's proud of you, not for building a successful company or for starting the foundation, for choosing to be present. I should have chosen that years ago. Maybe, but you chose it when it mattered most." Thomas paused by his car. "I've been thinking about something. For years I resented you for prioritizing work over family. I thought you'd made a choice to value money over relationships. But watching you these past 6 months, I realize it was more complicated than that. Thomas, let me finish." He smiled slightly. You were hurt and scared after the divorce, and you did what felt safe. You built walls around yourself and called it success. But when Grandpa needed you, when it really counted, you tore down every single one of those walls. You risked everything you'd built to protect him. That's who you really are, Mom. Not the person who missed graduations and birthdays, the person who fights for the people she loves, even when it's terrifying. Tears stung my eyes. I wish I'd figured that out sooner. Me too, but we can't change the past. We can only choose what we do now. He pulled me into a hug. I love you, Mom, and I'm really glad we're doing this work together. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you know. I drove to Dad's new condo, the one I'd helped him move into 3 months ago. It was smaller than his old place, but brighter, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I'd wanted to buy him something bigger, more luxurious, but he'd insisted on modest. I don't need fancy, he'd said. I need enough space for you and Thomas to visit comfortably, that's all. I found him on the balcony, reading a book about forensic accounting history. He looked healthier than he had in years, color back in his face, energy returned. There's my daughter, he said warmly as I joined him. How was the foundation launch? Perfect. We're going to help a lot of people, Dad. Because of you. Because of us, he corrected gently. You and Thomas did the heavy lifting. I just refused to be a silent victim. I sat beside him, looking out at the lake. I sold 40% of my company last week. His eyebrows rose. You didn't tell me you were considering that. I wasn't sure I'd go through with it until the papers were signed. But Dad, I spent 12 years building that company because I was afraid of being vulnerable. I thought financial success would protect me from ever being hurt again. But sitting in that hospital room, watching you fight for your life against someone who saw you as disposable, I realized something. No amount of money would have protected you. Only being there, being present and paying attention made the difference. So you're stepping back from the company? I'm restructuring my life. I'll still consult for major clients and oversee strategic decisions, but I'm not working 80-hour weeks anymore. I'm making time for what actually matters. For you. For Thomas. For building relationships instead of just building wealth. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. Your mother would be so proud of you. I wish she could have seen this, seen me finally figure out what she tried to tell me all those years. She knows. His voice was certain. Wherever she is, she knows. And she's proud, just like I am. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching boats move across the water. The trial starts next month, I said eventually. I know. Are you ready? As ready as I can be. Holloway's lawyers are going to try to discredit us, to make it seem like we fabricated everything. But we have Patricia's testimony, Dr. Chen's recording, the medical records, the families of his other victims. He can't talk his way out of this. No, Dad agreed. He can't. And that's because you refused to let him. A month later, I sat in a federal courtroom as the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Dr. Marcus Holloway would spend the next 25 years in prison. The Genesis biotech executives who funded his research received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The families of the 7 people who died were finally getting justice. The 9 survivors who'd been used as test subjects were receiving compensation and ongoing medical monitoring. St. Catherine's Hospital had implemented new oversight protocols and mandatory reporting systems for suspicious patient outcomes. Patricia Voss's testimony had been devastating and crucial. She'd sat on that stand for 3 days, detailing every aspect of the illegal trials, every patient she'd helped victimize, every falsified record. Her voice had shaken, but she'd never wavered. After the verdict was read, I found her outside the courthouse. She looked exhausted and relieved. Thank you, I said simply. I don't deserve thanks. I helped hurt those people. But you also helped stop it. And you're going to help prevent it from happening to others. That matters, Patricia. Redemption isn't erasing what you did. It's choosing to do better going forward. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I know, and we'll help you do that. That evening, I hosted dinner at Dad's condo. Thomas came with his girlfriend, a public defender he'd met during the trial. Dr. Chen came with her husband. We cooked together, laughed together, told stories about the past 6 months. At one point, I found myself standing at the window with Dad, looking out at the city lights. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? I asked. If you hadn't been alert enough to notice what Holloway was doing? If you'd been too scared to tell me? Sometimes, he admitted. But I try not to dwell on what-ifs. What matters is what actually happened. You showed up when I needed you. You fought for me when I was vulnerable. You chose to be brave when being silent would have been easier and safer. That's what I'll remember, Veronica. Not the years you were busy building your career, but the moment when you showed me exactly who you are at your core. Who am I? I asked, my voice soft. My daughter. Strong, fierce, loyal, and willing to risk everything for the people you love. I couldn't be prouder. I hugged him tight. This man who'd given me life, who'd supported me through my worst moments, who'd never stopped believing in me even when I'd been too busy to deserve his faith. I love you, Dad. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me what was happening. Thank you for trusting me to help. Always, sweetheart. Always. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the divorce that shattered me, the company I built from that pain, the years I spent chasing security and success at the cost of presence and connection. The moment my father gripped my wrist in terror and everything changed. I'd spent so long trying to be invulnerable that I'd forgotten the most important thing. We're not meant to be invulnerable. We're meant to be there for each other, especially in our most vulnerable moments. That's what family means. That's what love means. And finally, at 56 years old, I understood.